Gaz Williams here for SonicLAB, and today we're revisiting the circuit. Now it's on version 1.4. So you may remember we first looked at the circuit roughly about a year ago, and the reason we're revisiting it is because in that period now there's been significant updates to it that's actually made our original review somewhat out of date. Now you may remember in our original review of this groove box, essentially, there were a couple of sort of shortcomings. Now most of those shortcomings have largely been fixed really with these updates, all three updates I hasten to add, and I think Novation should be commended for such terrific support really after this has come out, you know. So when we first looked at it, we noticed that the MIDI in, although you could trigger sounds, MIDI in you couldn't actually record from external sound, from an external MIDI keyboard. Well, you can now, so that's a cool thing. One of the other major things is, one of our original criticisms were the drum sounds were, so of which we've got 4 drum voices, they were based on a set of samples that weren't that you couldn't change. Now you can change, and in that opening piece of music that you heard, I'd actually swapped out the drums for the sounds of a male voice choir, the Treorchy male voice choir actually. So there is, the memory allows for 60 seconds of samples that can be loaded into 64 slots. I've loaded in reasonably long samples here. Well, some of them are longer. And I loaded those in through the new software, which is all web MIDI based actually. We're going to look at that a little bit later, so I won't go into that at the moment. But so basically these sample slots, each sample, any of the 4 drum slots can all access this bank of samples, and but each drum can only play back 1 sample at a time. So it allows for some quite nifty sample swapping. Now, one of the things that Novation have introduced is a thing called sample flip, which allows you to swap out the samples in real time. Now, let's just do an example of that. I'm just going to create a fresh session. I'll go into record, nothing playing. I'm going to just go. I'm going to go Shift and drum 1, and now. And you can see there, you can actually automate the sample changing. The amount of things I can do to that sample, because they're all sharing drum 1, I've just restricted to my 4 parameters that I can adjust. Come out of record. Those are pitch, the sample length, so just very short, or let them long. We've got a distortion, and we've got a filter. And these parameters are all automatable as well. So you can see by coming away from using drum samples, it actually starts to bring the circuit into a different territory really, of being able to do maybe a little bit more sound design or experimental stuff. So as I mentioned, these workflow improvements, there's many, and they're across the whole kind of operational aspect of the circuit. So also what you can do now, which is cool, is that the different, well, drum 1 and 2 and drum 3 and 4, they can have different pattern length settings now. So drum 1, for instance, I can choose how many steps out of 16 that pattern runs for. Now there's 8 patterns per channel on the circuit, and each one of those patterns can now all be set to different step lengths. So what that means is that we can have polyrhythms going on, because each of the patterns then can have different step lengths, so when they finish and start again, they all go out of sync with each other, so you can create some really interesting rhythmical complexities. So what I'm going to do now is, though, I'm going to swap out the entire memory of this, so all that session, it's all saved using the online librarian, and I'm going to bring in the brand new Novation created sound pack. So I'm going to open the session view, and now this is looking at the brand new Team Novation Circuit pack, and the first thing that we can see is that you can actually colorize your sessions, and these are colorized based on different members of the Novation Circuit team have worked on different things. I should mention that there is a accompanying PDF file for this new bank, which gives real good in-depth descriptions about all the patches and the different sessions that they've created. But the reason why I'm showing you this is, so apart from being able to colorize your sessions, which really helps with identifying it, you can now change the session instantly. So if I'm going to play pattern 1 here, session 1. So when I choose, it waits until it finishes the current bar before jumping session. But now, if I hold down Shift, it'll jump instantly but retain its kind of relative place in the bar. I'll demonstrate. So you can see you can instantly put drum fills in, all sorts of things, and it works really, it's a very kind of slick process. All of that stuff though can't be automated, that's more just sort of top level performance. So as I mentioned, the circuit's evolved quite a lot, and Novation have actually created a little bit of a graphical kind of thing showing the development of the circuit over the past year, which is quite fun to have a look at. So anyway, now we're looking at the computer. This is a really huge part of the updates to the circuit, because in my original review, you know, what you created within the circuit, sort of, that was it. You couldn't back up your sessions, you couldn't edit things. Now all these things have all changed since these updates have come along. So what Novation have created is they've created a thing called circuit components. And what we have to do here with circuit components is, the first thing we have to do is connect circuit. So we click on the connect circuit via USB, and the display changes to show that we're now into this USB mode. And now what happens is, on the screen we can do a bunch of different things. We can upload, well, here we can see Novation, that I can get back to the original factory circuit pack, or, as I've just demonstrated, I've loaded in the Team Novation circuit pack. Now, to do a complete change of the memory, it takes 5.5 minutes or thereabouts to do it over USB. So don't expect to be doing this mid-gig, because that's just a bit too long. But that is the entirety of the memory. So that's the samples, the patches, and the sessions. So that's quite nice. Now, what's really cool is that this is a kind of cloud-based system. So I just log into any computer, so long as I'm using a browser that supports web MIDI. So I'm using Google Chrome here. I'm logged in, and when I'm logged in, if I go to my user patches here, I can see my various packs that I've created and saved on here. And then I could send pack to circuit. It'll swap that entire memory out for the one that I've chosen. So that's actually very cool. Now, this is like a free service that Novation are offering, and they claim that there's no limitation about how many packs that you can have on here. So I suppose with it only being 60 seconds worth of samples, it's not going to be enormous, but it's still a very nice feature for them to provide. Now, so that covers our ability to back up and stuff, but how do we actually edit samples? Well, what we do here is, I'd say maybe I'll create a new pack. So a new pack, this is a blank pack from the computer, and here we can go, I can click on samples, and now it's just a drag and drop interface. So I could clear grid. I've now got a blank grid. I could just drag samples on and just drop them into the slots. And when I do that, then the editor itself here will prepare the file for transfer. So to demonstrate this, I'll just grab a little drum loop, drop it into the slot. And we can see down the bottom here, the length of that drum loop was 5 seconds, and we've got 54 seconds left. So you can see you wouldn't want to be filling it up with drum loops because it would quickly take up all our sample thing. It's more geared for sort of one shots or single hits, or single notes, for instance. But that's how we would do it. So it's actually quite easy. And and you don't need to fill up. You could just load in 5 samples and pass that across. So obviously, if I've cleared the grid and was to load this drum loop in, I'll have got rid of all my drums. So just bear that in mind. You might want to modify one of the existing packs, maybe swap some samples out so you've still got a bunch of drums if you want to maintain that. So once I've loaded in my samples, I mean, I've only loaded in one sample here. I'm going to click the center circuit button, and it'll send the sample across. It's not the quickest thing, so we'll come back to this. So now we've loaded in that sample loop that I can play here. One thing should be noticed, that I only brought in one sample, but it took the same amount of time as if you were loading in the whole bunch of samples, so bear that in mind. And also another few sort of criticisms, I guess, is that your samples, whereas you can adjust the length of the sample, that's all you can do. You can't choose the start position, so if you wanted to load in one sample and then grab different parts of it, you can't. You can only just choose how long it is. And also the samples, they may be stereo when you drag them in, but the software turns it into mono. The samples are only mono, and there is still currently no way of panning those samples. So that's a bit of a drawback right now, but who knows what the future holds. So whilst we're talking about a few negatives, there's still a few things that haven't been addressed as yet. Whether they will or not, who knows. For me, one of the things is I wish when you are browsing synth patches that there was a way of auditioning them without having to have something pre-recorded. Yes, so you're sort of kind of picking sounds. If you had something recorded, you'd hear it change. But I'd like just to be able to sort of hear things like you can when you're choosing samples. I'd like to be able to do that with patches. You can't do that as of yet. And also, whether a patch is monophonic or polyphonic, there's no way of telling. And I think maybe some sort of color differentiation may be helpful there. That's one thing. And another thing I'd like to see is, like when you're in the synth modes, is some sort of standardization of these knobs. At the moment, they're macros and they're roughly set to certain things, but that's completely up to you. I would like to see some way of maybe holding down shift and these just adjusting certain fixed things like attack, release, cutoff, just some sort of direct access to the parameters, I think would be really, really helpful. So one of the big excellent developments really of Circuit is the fact that there is an editor available now. Now this was really kind of necessary really, because the Nova engine actually the dual Nova engines built into the Circuit are actually quite complex synths, and prior to the editor being available, all you had were these kind of preset macros. But now with the editor, which is available both as a standalone, as we've got running here, or as a Max for Live patch for Ableton Live, it opens up the entirety of the Nova engine. And we can see that as on the unit, if we swap between synth 1 with this kind of purpley colour scheme to synth 2 with the green colour scheme, the graphics as we toggle between synth 1 and synth 2 on the software, they've got the same colour scheme, so helpfully you know whether you're editing one or the other. Looking at the screen now, we can actually see the complexity of this, the Nova engine. It's essentially a dual oscillator synthesizer, but with very highly configurable LFOs. We've got like 3 envelopes. We've got a mod matrix with 20 slots with 2 sources per slot in the mod matrix. At the top here we can see here's where we can set the macros, and each macro can have 4 different parameters that can adjust, setting the start position, end position, depth. So you can see there's an awful lot of stuff here. So play a note. We can see that the editor is instantly changing the sound, which is great. So we can start to dive in and get creative. And as I mentioned, it's laid out it's laid out. It's a lot of information to take on board. But as I say, you can see that now you've got access to 2 highly configurable synths, and I think that this makes the circuit start to look like a much better value for money option, really. At 250 UK pounds to actually have these 2 synths plus everything else is starting to look a bit of a bargain. So if we look at the top of the screen, we can see that there's a librarian here, and we can see all 64 patches. We can name things, put them into genres, categories, that kind of thing. And also we can save the entirety to your computer. And to have this kind of librarian for a synthesizer of the complexity, I think it's kind of necessary and excellent to see that here. So we can see that with these new updates, the circuit has been transformed from what was initially a very promising and fun box into something a whole lot more. Especially with the editor, it makes it a much more professional and usable platform. There's an enormity of exploration that you can do with the editor, which is brilliant. But also the fact that that bringing in your own samples, being able to store your samples online, being able to back up the whole thing in just sort of essentially just 1 or 2 clicks is actually really cool. And I think Novation deserve to be commended for their support of this product since it got released. Okay, that pretty much wraps up our revisiting of the circuit version 1.4, and as I mentioned, highly impressed by how they've developed it. I should mention, you know, it does run on batteries, let's not forget, and I often find that I do just chuck it in my bag, or, you know, take it downstairs and chuck my headphones on and get stuck into it, and that portability, that kind of self-contained aspect of it is really refreshing in this sort of door-driven age, really. So yes, I think Circuit 1.4, big thumbs up from me, and let's hope that there's more updates to look forward to in the future. I'm Gaz Williams. See you soon. Bye-bye.